Hello and welcome to the Masonic Authors Guild International. This is Robert L.D. Cooper with Mark A. Tabbert. We are Magi. Our mission is to promote the highest standards in education, research and publications relating to the global phenomenon of Freemasonry. Since Magi launched in February 2024, we have produced more than 275 hours of recorded programs, including historical papers, academic interviews, book reviews, and unabridged audiobooks. Most of these programs are now available through Patreon, Spotify, Apple, and other podcast platforms. Welcome to the Masonic Authors Guild International's podcast, The Wide Masonic World. I'm Robert Cooper with Mark Tabbert. Robert "Rob" Collis was born and raised in Suffolk, England, and graduated with BA Honours and an MA, University of Sussex, and completed his Ph.D. in 2008 at the University of Turku, Finland. The dissertation won the thesis prize for the European Society for the Study of Western Esotericism in 2009. At the University of Sheffield between 2008 to 2011, he was a research fellow at the Centre of Freemasonry and Fraternalism and co-edited its journal and a related volume on 18th century Russia. During 2010 to 2012, he was at the Department of Russian and Slavonic Studies. A revised version of his dissertation was published by Brill in 2012. In 2013, Dr. Collis's first stint at Drake University, Des Moines, Iowa, began. Between 2013 and 2014, he was a research fellow at the University of Helsinki in Finland. Since 2018, he has been teaching at Drake University and is now an associate professor. In 2020, Oxford University Press published Initiating the Millennium, the Avignon Society and Illuminism in Europe. This was co-written with Professor Natalie Baer. Professor Collis is a founding member of Bibliofkia and is co-editor of this free online journal on 18th century Imperial Russia, hosted by the University of Illinois. A link will be provided on the Magi website and in relevant social media posts. He has presented papers at Masonic conferences since 2008, most recently at the 2024 International Conference on Freemasonry at UC Berkeley. Welcome, Professor Collis.
Thank you, Bob. It's a pleasure to be here. And thank you, Mark, too.
Before I ask any questions, Rob, I ask you to forgive any mispronunciations that Mark or I make. After reading your paper, it's clear that France had a major influence on the upper echelons of Russian society in the 18th century. Is that a fair observation, even if it is rather generalized? Did any other European nations have that same level of influence?
Thanks, Bob. I would say, in brief, yes, that's fair. I will elaborate. I was thinking, if you think of French influence in Europe and in the United States as into the late 18th century, it was enormous. As much as we like to have our put on our, patriotic caps, you have to say the French influence was first and foremost the greatest. It comes from the early 18th century, I would say, in terms of the Russian nobility wanted French, lapped up French material culture, French wine, French lace, French fashion. But of course, it spreads to the intellectual world, very much so with the philosophes, from Voltaire to Diderot, who we could probably talk about more later on, Montesquieu. But it's not to say that they were the only cultural influence. And you have to look at the English and the Scots as well, I think, who were particularly, of course, with the introduction of fraternalism and Freemasonry into into Russia, which was pretty much a domain restricted to the nobility. Fraternalism coming in the early 18th century under Peter the Great, with sort of bacchanalian societies, drinking societies, which were very strong in Scotland. I've looked at, in my work years ago now, in my book that was published in Brill, on the influence of a character like Robert Erskine, a Scot, on a character called Jacob or James Bruce, who had Scottish ancestry, Scottish father. So that fraternal culture from Scotland, the Scottish influence on Freemasonry with James Keith, and then you get Scottish and English influence on Freemasonry. And not just Freemasonry, on social culture, there was an English society, English club founded in St. Petersburg in 1770. English landscape gardening became very popular. And then, of course, there was a fashion for Scottish, or an appreciation of Scottish architects such as Charles Cameron in the 1770s. So I would say you have to look at English and Scottish, British, look at Swedish influence as well, and particularly some German influence, particularly Prussian. But yes, I would say absolutely French influence was first and foremost, and language. I forgot to mention, Russian nobility by the late 18th century spoke French probably better than they did Russian. This was the case until Pushkin in the 19th century, who was more comfortable in French.
This podcast is for educational purposes and perhaps entertainment. While the Masonic Authors Guild International provides the most accurate information possible, listeners use the information at their own risk. This podcast and its contents are Magi's and Professor Collis's property, as are all the opinions and information it presents. Robert L.D. Cooper's, Mark A. Tabbert's, and Professor Collis's, and any other speakers' views and opinions within the podcast do not represent nor speak for Freemasonry, any Masonic organization, their former or current employers, in any way, shape, or form. Magi, Cooper, Tabbert, or Collis will not compensate you in any way whatsoever if you ever happen to suffer an inconvenience due to the information herein contained.